Nigeria's President Tinubu is calling for reforms in international development finance institutions to prevent economic exploitation of Africa. He's also urging these institutions to focus on the specific needs of developing democracies. Tinubu made the comments during a bilateral meeting with his South African counterpart ahead of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. State House correspondent Adesua Omoruan, who is live in New York, reports.
President Tinubu arrives in New York for his debut at the United Nations General Assembly as Nigeria's leader.
How are you? I'm very well. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. Good to see you.
Before the general debate, President Tinubu seizes the opportunity to strengthen diplomatic ties. He held a crucial meeting with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, discussing economic cooperation and advocating international development finance institutions to better serve Africa's interests. President Ramaphosa stresses the importance of restructuring financing to support emerging economies.
Many countries are locked out of the system. We've got to be more inclusive. We've got to bring in, particularly Africa, to play its given role. And so therefore, that's the message that we will be pushing here at the UN. And I'm glad that many African leaders agree with us.
Do you think that the Global South is doing enough? There seems to be a lot of talking but no action. We have this push by the Global South, but it doesn't really move the needle. What do we need to do?
Well, a lot is being done. It's going beyond just saying, because when we talk about the restructuring of the UN Security Council, many countries are beginning to agree with that, and even those that are members see a lot of credibility in that type of message. So it will change as time moves on.
Furthermore, the president also engaged in a brainstorming session with governors and ministers on the trip.
There's several engagements, side meetings, side events, many on education, SDG, healthcare, which the country is engaging in. And the subnational are also engaging in all side events as well. Now, Nigeria now is moving forward. Our doors are open for business and investments. And you can see from the recent pronouncement of the federal government in terms of subsidy removal, exchange rate liberalization, things are beginning to move forward. Stock exchange is now more robust than ever. The economy, wait for 1 year and see where Nigeria will be. Yes, when you embark on reforms, there's some slight adjustments which we're going through. Like I always say, it's like a pregnant woman. The pain she goes through pregnancy and the joy of giving birth is what you'll see next year by the grace of God.
This year's United Nations General Assembly session, the 78th, marks the first full-scale gathering of world leaders in 3 years due to the pandemic's disruption of global travel and gatherings. President Tinubu is slated to address global leaders on Tuesday, marking his inaugural appearance at the summit, which aims to generate commitment and action on more than a dozen crucial global issues. Adesua Omoruan, Arise News.
Adesua Omoruan joins us now from New York. Adesua Omoruan, live in New York. How are you? Is it good morning at your end, or it's good afternoon?
Very well, Dr. Abati.
Good to see you.
It's 4 a.m. on the dot, local time,
4
Dr.
a.m.
Abati.
Okay, I was going to ask you to take us through, the main highlights on the president's, program for today. We understand that today you will take the podium and address the General Assembly. What time is that likely to be, and is there an advance copy of some of the issues that is likely to address as he gives his maiden speech at the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, thank you so much again, Dr. Abati. This is the calm before the storm. As I said, it's just about 4 a.m. local time before the general debate begins. The first day today, President Bola Tinubu will be the 5th African president and the 14th speaker for the day. Hopefully, nobody will try to outdo former Cuba leader Fidel Castro's speech of 1960 when he spoke for 262 minutes, Dr. Abati. The world leaders are usually given between 15 to 20 minutes to make their remarks on that global podium. We do not have the exact time for President Bola Tinubu today, but given the number in which he is supposed to appear on the podium, we are thinking it will be much later in the day as the 14th speaker. And talking about his speech, although we do not have an advanced copy, but the special advisor to the president on media and publicity, Ajurin Gilale, has been speaking. He's been briefing the media even before they departed Nigeria. We know that President Bola Tinubu, during his maiden speech, will touch on a lot of issues, including the need to reform global solidarity, humanitarian crisis, the need to ensure and close the gap on inequalities, climate change, sustainable development, better governance for people, especially in Africa. President Bola Tinubu's speech is likely to touch on all of those and many more.
All right. Real quickly, Adesuwa, I'd like to ask you, what can you take away, from that conversation you had with the South African president yesterday?
Well, thank you, Rufai. Apparently, the South African president had met with President Bola Tinubu before I doorstepped him at the Millennium by Hilton, where we have a lot of the African global leaders having their meetings, particularly bilateral meetings. They had spoken about global finance during their closed-door meeting, but here I was asking him about, this talk shop a lot of people refer to every year by global leaders. They come, they talk about their grievances, but little problems are solved after this humongous stage for world leaders. I like to call it the Super Bowl of diplomacy. But what I took up from that conversation with President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa is that African leaders, who he says a lot of them are here attending the UNGA, are committed. What we have not seen in a long time, Rufai, is Africa speaking in one voice, in solidarity, when it comes to issues affecting them. And he's saying, for the continent suffering so much impact and, trying to survive on so many fronts, there needs to be a recalibration, there needs to be a reform, especially of financing. And it's something not just President Cyril Ramaphosa has spoken about. We've heard William Ruto of Kenya. We've heard President Bola Tinubu, how Africa is suffering from the consequences, most especially from what they have had to inherit. For instance, the climate crisis. There's not enough funding. The funding that has been promised by the major polluters and the rest of the world isn't just coming. You have the Sustainable Development Goals, which is half-time, by the way. 7 years ago, global leaders committed to this. We see that countries usually, who do not pollute as much, have to suffer so much. And Africa is saying, that is enough, that should stop. When it comes to debt crisis, debt burden, they are calling for some sort of a relief so that they can face other economic challenges with their tepid growth. So President Cyril Ramaphosa is saying that Africa seems to be united at some point at gatherings like this to speak together in unison to make a point. But Rufai, what is left to be seen is what happens after they take that podium. What changes, really?
Well, Adesuwa, tell us about the president's delegation. You recall that before this trip, the president had said that, he will go with a very small team and whoever does not have any business will not travel with him. But we've seen about 6 governors on that delegation. They will have their own aides. About 8 ministers are there. The National Security Advisor was mentioned in the statement issued by Chief Ngelale. Even the chief of staff abandoned office. He's also in New York there. So not to talk of all kinds of persons who will be hanging around that Millennium Plaza. So what's the size of the crowd that you have seen since that delegation arrived?
Dr. Bat, it's interesting you bring out that topic because it's been a topic of conversation in a lot of quarters. I must tell you, when the president arrived, he was received at the airport by just 2 government officials, Nigeria's representative to the United Nations and Nigeria's foreign minister. Those two, and that was a departure from what we've seen in the past with other past presidents, where you have a huge entourage welcoming them at the airport. So that was a departure. And you're right, you're correct. The government had said, President Bola Tinubu particularly had said, those who do not have, government officials who do not have business, any business being at the Onga, should not be here. But surprisingly, we've seen at least 6 governors and 7 ministers, including the Minister of Finance, Coordinating Minister of the Economy. We've seen the Minister of Poverty Elevation, the Minister of Solid Minerals, who, by the way, had his own bilateral meetings yesterday with some investors. I can say it's a moderate crowd from what we've seen from the past, Dr. Bati. I mean, you've been in government quarters. You know how these things play out. We've seen some governors who we were not told on, who were not listed on the official government list. But you recall the statement was saying the government will not be paying the cost of government officials who do not have business being here. In a bid, for instance, I guess it was in a bid to cost of governance, but there are critics who will say this crowd or this number of people with President Bola Tinubu on this trip is still a lot. What they will be tasking them is, what do you bring back from all of this travel? What does Nigeria stand to gain with the number of entourage you're with?
Well, thank you, Adesua.
All right.
Take time out also to enjoy New York. It's an interesting place.